Hi, everybody. For those of you who have missed a day this week when we were going over the CSS Transform properties, I just wanted to quickly review what we covered in class so you have the necessary information. We started out our discussion about CSS 2D transformations with some slides. So I'll go through those and then we'll look at some examples. Translate is a method that moves an element on the x-axis and or the y-axis. We use the transform declaration um, to call this method. So the syntax is transform translate, and then in parentheses you're going to have the x-axis, a comma, and then the y-axis. On the x-axis, a positive number will move it to the right and a negative number to the left. And on the y-axis, a positive number will move your element down, and a positive number will move your element down, and a negative number will move the element up. The rotate method rotates an element on the given number of degrees. So the syntax is transform, rotate, and then the number of degrees with DEG for degrees included as part of that value. Positive number will rotate it clockwise, a negative number will rotate your element counterclockwise. So we gave some examples of some syntax. Transform, rotate 23 degrees. We will look at, when we do our example, also transform, rotate 180 degrees. That's going to take your object and spin it all the way around, upside down, basically. So transform, rotate negative 180 degrees will do the exact same thing, just in a different direction. The scale method increases or decreases the size of an element in height and width. Maybe I should say width and height, since that is the correct syntax. So the syntax is transform, scale, and then in parentheses, the width, comma, and the height. And that is because it is a XY pair. And the X is going to scale the width, and the height is going to scale in the Y direction. Or you can just transform scale with one value, and that is going to be proportional. The parameter is meaning the X and the Y will scale the same amount. The parameter is a multiplier, so a whole number will increase the size and a decimal number less than 1 will decrease the size. Passing two parameters will not keep the aspect ratio because it'll scale the height and the width differently. So in the first example, transform scale 0.52 is going to cut the width in half while doubling the height. Transform scale 2 will double the size of your element, and transform scale 0.5 will cut it in half. If you only want to scale in one direction, you're going to use the scale X or the scale Y method. The scale X method will increase or decrease the size of an element's width, while the scale Y method will increase or decrease the size of an element's height. The syntax is transform scale X and then the width, and transform scale Y and then the height inside parentheses. You can see some examples down here. The way that we did it when we declared both a height and width was transform scale, and then parentheses, in this example, 0.5, comma 2. But if we only want to go the Y direction, we're going to transform scale Y with a 2 in parentheses. We'll double the height, and then transform scale X 0.5 will cut the width in half. The skew method skews an element along the X and Y axis by a given angle. The syntax is transform skew, and then in parentheses, the X axis value, comma, and the Y axis value, angle. The parameter is in degrees. A positive number will skew towards the left or down, and a negative number will skew right or up. Passing only one parameter will skew the X axis only. We want to make sure that we are including the DEG for degrees, and we have some examples below of the syntax. transform colon skew, and then in parentheses, we have 10 degrees, comma, negative 20 degrees. That's going to skew 10 degrees in the x direction and negative 20 degrees in the y direction. If we do just transform colon skew with 20 degrees in parentheses, that is only going to skew 20 degrees in the x direction. And then there's one other example. Then we can also do skew x and skew y if we only want to skew in one direction. Um, the skew x method skews an element only along the x-axis, while the skew y method skews an element along the y-axis only. Transform colon skew x with an amount of degrees, or transform colon skew y with degrees in parentheses. Once again, the parameter is in degrees. A positive number will skew towards the left or down, and a negative number will skew right or up. So transform colon skew 20 degrees in parentheses is exactly the same, or will display exactly the same as transform colon skew x 20 degrees. If we want to skew only in the y direction, we must do transform colon skew y and however many degrees we want to skew it. And finally, the matrix. The matrix is a method that combines all of the transform methods into one. The syntax is transform colon matrix. Scale x, skew y, skew x, scale y, translate x, translate y. For the skew, a value of 1 is equivalent to 45 degrees. It is just a numeric value. It is not in degrees. In none of these are you specifying a measurement. Even on the translating, x translated y, pixels is assumed. So and you do need to have a value for scale x and scale y. If you include 0 for the scale, then it will, as I said, it's a multiplier. So anything times 0 is 0, and you will lose your image altogether. Then for our lab, we went into Replit, and there's a REPL there titled CSS Animations. On the index page, there are several divs set up for you. In the style.css file, there is styling for the first box, which shows on your screen in light blue. For your lab, I ask that you complete the following. Create styling for the other 11 divs, identifying each by the provided ID, and then use CSS to fill each div with a 200 by 200 pixel box. Make them different colors so they are easy to identify. You'll be adding text, so if your background color is dark, make sure you set your text color to white. Use the transform property named in the ID to transform each box. Copy the transform code from the CSS and insert it into the div on the index page. I'm going to go through a couple of examples of those now. So over to Replit, you can see we have the 200 pixel by 200 pixel box. It is light blue, and I've included text in the div that identifies it as the original. And we're not going to change that. So we need to create 11 more divs, but I'm going to start by just copying this and pasting it once, because all of these are going to have the transform property. So we might as well include that as we copy and paste. So we're going to take this, control copy, and you're going to keep going until you have 10 of them. I'm just doing a few so I can make some examples. I'm going to start by changing all the colors, and you can pick anything. So I'm just going to make them all different, and that's just so that they are visually different on the screen. And let's see, we'll go into do we have a red? And once again, for many of these darker ones, I'm going to add in a color of white just to make the text more visible. And now I have to start changing the IDs to what I'm going to transform. So I'm going to take that translate ID and just paste it in there. We will also we'll rotate clockwise. We will scale down. And we will skew. Sorry, I keep going back to the slides. All right, so now we have all of our different squares there that we can now work with. So for the translate, we're going to do transform translate. And in our parentheses, we have to pick a value. So if I do 100 pixels, you see that the box moved 100 pixels to the right. If I add another 100 pixels, it's now going to move 100 pixels down. And that's how translate works. If I make this a negative, it's now moved 100 pixels up. So now I'm going to take this that I just put in here, I'm going to copy it over, and I'm going to put it into this div right here. And that's just so that I can see what you did to get the box where it is. So rotate clockwise, we're going to use the rotate property. And then in order to do clockwise, we're going to move in the positive direction. Let's just do 45 degrees. We'll take this, we'll copy it into rotate clockwise. Now we're going to scale down. So that's the scale method. And in order to scale down, I'm going to use a decimal value less than 1. So I'll do 0.8. And you'll see it gets smaller. I'm going to take that, move it over, paste it in there. And then finally for the red, we're going to skew it. And I will skew, let's go 45 degrees. And you'll see that's what it does. All right. I can then, if I do negative 45 degrees, it's going to skew the other direction. If I add a second value, it's going to skew in both directions. And that's it. You just have to do all of, oh, I didn't copy and paste. Let me move this over. And you can see when you look at the words, you can see how they're all warped, and that's because it's skewed. So next we're going to go into 3D transformations, and that's the simple rotate X, Y, and Z. We're going to go back to the slides for a moment and talk about 3D transformation. First thing you need when you're doing any 3D transformations is the transform-style property. You can have a value of flat or preserve 3D. The flat value is default and renders in 2D, so you really only need to use it when you're doing 3D. And in order to render your 3D, you must include the transform style property with the value preserve 3D. The syntax is below, except for that T should be lowercase. I will fix that. But transform style preserve 3D. And I will show you when we go back over to do the examples where that will be included. And then you have your rotate X, rotate Y, rotate Z. As we know, the rotate method rotates an element a given number of degrees. And using rotate X, Y, and Z will allow us to rotate it on different axes. The transform rotate X 0 degrees will rotate on the X axis, or however many degrees. Rotate Y, however many degrees, will rotate on the Y axis, and rotate Z, your desired degrees, will rotate on the Z axis. The rotate X, and we'll go through this more in the example since I can't give you the same visual I did in class, but rotating on the X axis is going to, or the Y axis is going to spin it in one direction or the other. Rotate Z is very much what we have been doing all along. Your Z axis is that flat plane, and so that will look no different when we go through it. And then you can translate Z. And translate Z is going to move an element on the Z axis. And that's basically a distance. So your syntax is transform colon translate Z, and then in the parentheses, whatever distance you want to move it. This property will move an element closer to or further away from the user, and the distance is specified in pixels. So now we're going to go back to Replit. We have the rotate X, rotate Y, rotate Z. We need to make 3 more blocks for these. Rotate Y, rotate Z. Delete these so they're not skewed so we can see what's happening here. Let me give them some different colors. Okay, so now we have 3 new boxes with 3 new colors. When you rotate X, say 25 degrees. Now let's give it more. Let's go 45 degrees. All right, it looks shorter, and that's because it's turning away from you in that vertical direction. So now we'll take the same thing, and we'll move this down, but we'll make this rotate Y. Now it looks thinner because it's rotating away from you in that horizontal direction. And then finally, rotate Z is what we've seen before, where it just turns and makes a diamond. Okay, so you're going to go in and you're going to do these. And what I would like you to do is just play with these degrees until you really feel like you have a good idea as to what it's doing and what's happening. And as we talked about, if we do 180 degrees, we're just flipping it over. It's going to look the same. And if we do 90 degrees, we're looking at the edge of it. So we'll get nothing. All right, and that's it for the 2D and 3D transformations. I will make another video that's going to show you this 3D cube that we did. Oh, and once again, you want to take this, copy it over. Okay, thank you.